Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today, let's talk about the 2020 gubernatorial elections as well as the Puerto Rican 2020 statehood referendum. Now, let's just dive right into these. First off, we have Washington. Washington is safe blue. Current Governor Jay Inslee ran in the 2020 presidential election, which put the status of the state's governorship a little bit more into flux. But after getting the Democrats to adopt his what was in practice Green New Deal proposal, he ended his presidential campaign and instead went back to Washington to run for the governorship again, and he has dominated since. Speaking of dominating, despite current governor retiring, Utah's Republican challenger, I guess? No, Republican candidate for the state is doing incredibly well, polling above 50% regularly, while his opponent, a Democrat, cannot even break 30% sometimes. As such, I believe his name is Cox, is going to win re-election in Utah handily. Now we come to our first contested race, Montana, and, unfortunately for Democrats, the first flip of the evening. I'm recording this at midday. First flip of the session, which is Montana being flipped from a Democratic seat held by Steve Bullock to a Republican seat. This is just coming down to the fact that Montana does default back to Republicans pretty quickly, though it is more Democratic-leaning than virtually all of its Great Plains counterparts. Right now, the Republican has been polling quite well, and it seems that the Democratic candidate, the former lieutenant governor, is decoupled from Steve Bullock on popularity and polling, meaning while he is polling at mid-40s, his opponent is high 40s to 50s. So it is a flip in favor of Republicans. The only reason it's not likely is due to the fact that it is a flip and there could be a change on Election Day. North Carolina, shockingly, will be a pure Republican, remaining a Republican state. Now going down to Missouri, which, if you've been paying attention to any gubernatorial news, you've probably heard about Missouri, where there's been a massive conundrum, kerfuffle, sorry, that's the word I'm looking for, where the incumbent governor is, I believe his name's Dunleavy? That doesn't sound right. Galloway. That doesn't sound, is that the challenger? The Republican, sorry, when it comes to the gubernatorial races, I am much worse with candidate names than I am with the senator presidency. As such, I'm just going to refer to the Republican incumbent, as the Republican incumbent has been heavily immersed in corruption allegations, and his Democratic opponent has been polling decently. However, this is Missouri, and he is still polling high 40s, sometimes 50s, while his opponent is only low 40s. However, that does make a competitive race. As such, Missouri is likely Republican. Indiana, safe Republican, not a shocker there. West Virginia, I am actually putting as likely Republican. Despite the fact the Republican incumbent, Jim Justice, I do remember his name, is polling decently ahead of his opponent. I will say he did run in 2016 as a Democrat and then flipped to Republicans after victory, which soured his relations with some parts of West Virginia. But, and also he is not... West Virginia is notoriously hard to poll, especially for governor races. So normally he would be safe, but I'm putting it as likely because I am considering this a bit of a flip. Last time they voted for a Democrat, this time they're voting for a Republican. In North Carolina, I am putting the race as likely Democratic. I want to put it as safe because the Democrat has far and away polled really well. However, his Republican opponent has periodically polled decently enough that I am going to tie, much like with Missouri, where I'm like, it should be safe red, but there's a little bit of kerfuffle there. Same with North Carolina. Should be safe blue, but there's enough of a there I'm going to put as likely. But keep in mind, likely basically means the incumbent will win, except under extraordinary circumstances. To Delaware, shocker, it's going to be blue. Now, for those of you who don't normally follow gubernatorial races, Vermont and New Hampshire, you probably think, okay, Vermont's probably safe blue, while New Hampshire is probably going to be like leans blue or something. They're both actually going to be safe red. This is due to the fact both the incumbent governors are very, well, in Vermont, the incumbent governor is very popular. He is, and basically is held hostage by the Democratic State House and State Senate. As such, he doesn't have any real power in the state and is probably the most moderate Republican in the United States. And as long as he can run for re-election, he will probably succeed in running for re-election. If he tries to go for, Senate or presidency or any other office, he's probably going to lose. So he knows, as long as I run for governor, I win. And another important point is Vermont and New Hampshire vote for their governors every 2 years, not every 4 years. As such, these guys are going to be up again in 2022. So if you hear anything about term limiting, that's going to happen a lot faster here than in other states. As for New Hampshire used to be a very red state and has over the past 4 years transitioned to a very blue state. However, Sununu does have incumbency bias, much like Vermont or Massachusetts or Maryland, like any of these blue states where they elected a Republican governor mid-Obama and are just like, well, we're comfortable with them because they don't have any real power now. To give you an idea, Sununu vetoed back when there was a slight Republican control of New Hampshire, he vetoed the bill to abolish the death penalty in the state. Once Democrats took control, they were able to override his veto when they passed it again. So, in many ways, the Republican governors of Vermont and New Hampshire are kind of paper elephants, if to use a term. But let's also talk about the gubernatorial races in the U.S. territories. Can't talk about American Samoa. I have no info there. I have looked it up. I can't find many polls or anything about that. So, may the best candidate win. But as for Puerto Rico, it's going to be real interesting. So, as you can see, Puerto Rico, you have 4 candidates, 5 theoretically. In practice, you have 2. Pedro Pierluisi, is the new progressive candidate, while Carlos Delgado Altieri, I think that's how you pronounce his name, or Thierry, is the popular Democratic candidate. You see, in Puerto Rico, the parties overall, are split along really statehood lines. What's the future of Puerto Rico? The New Progressive Party supports statehood. Popular Democratic supports status quo. Independents, that's tad obvious. Citizens Victory, they just want to have a commission set up to decide the future of Puerto Rico, which is really, we need to do something about this. While Project Dignity is mostly an anti-corruption campaign and doesn't really care one way or another. And in response, the Puerto Rican people have decided they don't care one way or another. But as you can see, for the most part, the New Progressive Party has polled incredibly well. There was one poll that came out here that showed, the Popular Democratic Party is ahead, but given the spikes for the 2 third parties, I'm going to say for right now... Now, keep in mind, these are contested races. These are close. I'm going to say New Progressive with Pedro Pierluisi has it, and the reason is both they've been polling well. New Progressive is still popular despite the minor kerfuffle that occurred with the guy who got elected in 2016. They're still very popular, and the main thing that's going to help him is the fact that Puerto Rican statehood is on the ballot. And as you can see from the polls, Puerto Rico is currently leaning towards a yes vote. Sorry, I was thinking how I could phrase that. With a lot of undecided voters, which could sway things, but judging by what I've seen and the research I've done, yes seems like a likely result. Now, an important factor here is this is going to be the first Puerto Rican statehood poll that is just, do you want to join the U.S., yes or no? The phrase is exactly, should Puerto Rico be admitted immediately into the Union as a state? As it says here, this is the exact wording used for the statehood referendums for Alaska and Hawaii. Virtually every other Puerto Rican statehood referendum has had between 3 and 4 options, where statehood usually wins a plurality, while the other one's kind of middle about. as such, people go, oh, well, it wasn't a majority. You can't say they won. Can't say they won. There was one that was held back in, I think, 2017 where the opposition boycotted because they knew statehood would win. But this time around, when you look at the voter, the registered voter and likely voter screenings, it seems likely that yes will win. As such, I'm going to say it is likely yes will win, and it is also bolstered by the fact that this time a yes victory may actually have teeth in the form of the Democrats, especially Barack Obama, saying Puerto Rico should become a state. Or, sorry, I just messed up here. He has called for Puerto Rico and DC to have equal representation in our government, which means become a state. So, I think a likely yes for the referendum with a pro-statehood governor as well. So, with all that being said, if you like the video, drop a like down below and also a comment. What are your opinions on the marks I've put for the gubernatorial race and as well as Puerto Rico? Do you want Puerto Rico to be a state or should it remain a territory in your opinion? Also, you can subscribe to the channel to see new content when it's released by clicking subscribe and the notification bell. If you want to hear more from me outside of YouTube, I have a Twitter at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description. Otherwise, as always, have a wonderful day.